First Samuel 28 is a very controversial passage. Most controversial is whether the spirit of the prophet Samuel was raised from the dead by the medium of Endor. Find out the facts about this narrative on this episode of Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Okay, now today we are going to talk about 1 Samuel 28 and the seance that was associated with the medium of Endor, who's sometimes called in older translations the Witch of Endor. Now, she's not really a witch, she's a medium, but that's close enough for working terms. So we're just going to call her a medium in this video. Now, what is so controversial about the passage is what was the identity of the spirit that was raised? There are some people who argue that the spirit is just a demon. Some think it's just a random hallucination by the medium. Others will think it is the actual spirit of Samuel himself. So we're going to walk through this passage and we are going to try to identify the spirit in question here and talk a little bit about what's going on in this passage. And how we're going to do this is we're going to first read the passage, and then we're going to just walk through it verse by verse and comment on it as we go. All right. So first, let's read the passage. 1 Samuel 28, and we'll go from verses 5 to 22. Quote, "When Saul saw the camp of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. When Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams, or by Urim, or by the prophets. Then Saul said to his servants, 'Seek for me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her.' And the servants said to him, 'Behold, there is a woman who is a medium at Endor.' Then Saul disguised himself by putting on other clothes, and went, he and 2 men with him, and they came to the woman by night. And he said, 'Conjure up for me, please, and bring up for me whom I shall name to you.' But the woman said to him, 'Behold, you know what Saul has done, how he has cut off those who are mediums and spiritists from the land. Why are you then laying a snare for my life to bring about my death?' And Saul vowed to her by the Lord, saying, 'As the Lord lives, there shall no punishment come upon you for this thing.' Then the woman said, 'Who shall I bring up for you?' And he said, 'Bring up Samuel for me.' When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. And the woman spoke to Saul, saying, 'Why have you deceived me? For you are Saul.' And the king said to her, 'Do not be afraid, but what do you see?' And the woman said to Saul, 'I see a divine being coming out of the earth.' And he said to her, 'What is his form?' And she said, 'An old man is coming up, and he is wrapped with a robe.' Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed with his face to the ground and did homage. Then Samuel said to Saul, 'Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?' Saul answered, 'I am greatly distressed, for the Philistines are waging war against me, and God has departed from me and answers me no more, either through prophets or by dreams. Therefore I have called to you, that you may make known to me what I should do.' And Samuel said, 'Why then do you ask me, since the Lord has departed from you and has become your adversary? And the Lord has done accordingly as he spoke through me, for the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David. As you did not obey the Lord, and did not execute his fierce wrath on Amalek, so the Lord has done this thing to you this day. Moreover, The Lord will also give over Israel along with you into the hands of the Philistines. Therefore, tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. Indeed, the Lord will give over the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines." Then Saul immediately fell full length up on the ground and was very afraid because of the words of Samuel. Also, there was no strength in him, for he had not eaten food all day and night. And the woman came to Saul and saw he was terrified and said to him, "Behold, your maidservant has obeyed you, and I have taken my life in my hand and have listened to your words which you spoke to me. Now, please listen to the voice of your maidservant, and let me set a piece of bread before you that you may eat and have strength when you go on your way." Okay, so let's break down this passage and take us verse by verse and see what's going on here. Start with verse 5. When Saul saw the Philistine camp, he was afraid and trembled violently. So, this is sort of setting up the stage for what happens, his bad decisions. So, the Philistines gather together a large confederacy. So, they got a whole bunch of the Sea People tribes together, and they are launching this campaign against Saul and the Israelites. And Saul's response to this is he acts out of fear. And like many who act out of fear, they don't always act wisely. So this is what Saul's doing. He's acting out of fear here, and so he goes to the Lord in verse 6. Quote, "He inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him in dreams, or by Urim, or by the prophets." Okay, so Saul here is coming to this battle, and he's got with him the high priest. The high priest is there because the high priest controls the Urim and the Thummim. And we'll do another video that talks about this later on. But it's not just a random yes or no. There is a message that is conveyed through the Urim and the Thummim. And the Lord's not communicating that way. So the high priest, he's there, but God's not talking to the high priest. And he also is not communicating to Saul through the prophets. So the prophets don't get an answer either. What I find really interesting here is the Lord did not answer him in dreams. Now, one of the things we kind of got to keep in mind with Saul was he was a prophet himself. Saul was a prophet and had prophesied. And there was a time in Saul's life when Saul got direct answers from God. In Saul's particular case, he was a prophet, he would prophesy, and the Lord would sometimes answer in dreams. We see here, though, that the Lord has stopped doing that in verse 6. Verse 7. Saul then said to his servant, "Find me a woman who is a medium, so I can go and consult her." And his servants replied, "There's a woman at Endor who is a medium." Okay, now there's some interesting things about this passage, this particular verse. One, he asks for a woman. Being a medium in that day and age was woman's work. You didn't go to a man who was a medium, because men didn't serve as mediums back then. But it was women who did this. And it was part of, say, the superstition of the age that men were often seen as being vertically closer to the gods, but women had a more horizontal relationship with the spirit world. So you would say, go to a priest, a male, to pass on, say, prayers to a specific deity. But women are more your spiritual generalists. They would go and they could contact all sorts of spirits for you. They were not necessarily in contact with the gods, but they were in contact with many other spirits. So this is a real interesting cultural detail here that I think sometimes gets really overlooked. So he's asking for a GP, a generalist of the spirit world. So that's why he asks for a woman who's a medium. And that's why specifically this gender assignment here. Now, the other interesting thing about verse 7 is that his servants reply, "There's a woman at Endor who is a medium." Okay, that raises some interesting questions. How did this servant know this? Because under Israelite rule, they were not supposed to allow a medium to live. So This raises some very interesting questions. Is had this servant been to her before? Was there a pre-existing relationship between the servant and, or is he just hearing this by reputation? We don't know for certain, but it raises some interesting questions. Verse 8. Saul disguised himself by putting on different clothes, and set out with the two of his men. And they came to the woman at night, and Saul said, consult a spirit for me. Bring up for me the one I tell you. Okay, so Saul here tries to hide his identity. He puts on different clothes, and he sets out with only two men. Okay. His camp is in the valley. His army is there. He's trying not to draw attention to himself, but he needs some minimal protection. So he's got two henchmen with him. But he wants to keep this on the down low, so he hides his identity. And he doesn't say to the woman exactly who to bring up. He's just negotiating well, can you do this for me? And she responds to him in verse 9. But the woman said to him, you surely know what Saul has done, how he has killed the mediums and spiritists in the land. Why are you setting a trap for me to get me killed? Okay. That I think is very interesting about Saul in general. Saul didn't complete his jobs when he was given a task. He only did them halfway. I think what we got here is more of a symptom of why this happened to Saul in this particular verse here. He didn't completely kill the Amalekites, and he didn't completely kill the mediums. But she still thinks it's a trap. So she's being cautious here. She's being cautious, and I think probably she should be a little more cautious. Okay? But she still practices her craft, but is trying to be a little cagey about this because she doesn't want to be on the wrong end of a spear. So, but then Saul replies, verse 10, Saul swore to her by the Lord, as surely as the Lord lives, nothing bad will happen to you because of this. Now, of course, the irony here is that Saul swears by the Lord she won't be killed, when it is the Lord's command to put the mediums and the spiritists to death. So, he swears a sacred oath, but it's an oath he should have never sworn. So we see here, Saul is spiraling into depravity. He half finishes his commands. Okay, he's commanded to do something and he only does half the job. He is using the name of the Lord inappropriately to make oaths that go against the commands of the Lord. So, this is just going from bad to worse for Saul. Verse 11. Who is it that you want me to bring up for you? The woman asked. Bring up Samuel for me, he answered. Okay. Now, the woman relents and says to Saul, okay, yeah, I'll agree to it. You swore your sacred oath, so we'll do this thing. And Saul goes right for it. He says, bring up Samuel for me. But what's interesting here, again, is the medium here is bringing up a holy prophet by unholy means. Now, she would have had contact with familiar spirits, unholy spirits. So the whole idea that she can bring up raise a holy prophet is kind of a little sketchy to begin with. But there's also a suggestion here. There's a suggestion here that she could potentially bring up anybody. One of the interesting things is that people sometimes say that, oh, this could never have happened. You can't contact the spirits of the dead. Well, specifically saying in Scripture, it is forbidden to contact the spirits of the dead. But it's not impossible. And that's one of the things I think we need to keep in mind here is that nowhere in the Bible does it say that it is impossible to contact the dead. It's just forbidden. So, I think what's happening here in verse 11 is that the medium and Saul here are aware of this, that it is forbidden to contact the dead, but not impossible. Then we get to verse 12. When the woman saw Samuel, she screamed, and then she asked Saul, why did you deceive me? You are Saul. A lot of interesting stuff packed in this little one here. Okay, so he sees Samuel. Now, this is our first indication that the spirit is actually Samuel. This is a comment by the narrator. Okay? The person narrating this passage says the woman saw Samuel. What's her reaction? She screams. Why'd she scream? Probably because she's not expecting Samuel. This is a woman who has had contact with familiar spirits many, many, many times. She knows that there's some dark stuff that's coming up from that well. But she doesn't expect to see Samuel. But because she sees Samuel, she puts 2 and 2 together and says, "Oh, you're Saul. Yeah, okay, that funny-looking wig and fake nose of yours isn't going to fool me anymore. The real Samuel's shown up. That must mean you're the real Saul." Verse 13. But the king said to her, "Do not be afraid. What do you see?" She answers, "I see a spirit form coming out of the earth," the woman answered. Okay, so this is a spirit coming up from Sheol, the grave. Now, we have to remember, in Israelite cosmology, there are 2 sections of Sheol. There's the good side of the tracks and the bad side of the tracks. The bad side of the tracks will be given names like suffering, but the good side, that's Abraham's bosom. That's a place of blessing, that's a place of healing, that's a place of joy. Still waiting for the coming of the Messiah, but it's a good side. That's a good place to go. There's a bad side of Sheol too. Okay? And ancient Israelites believed that Sheol was beneath the earth. And between Sheol and earth was waters. The waters that were under the earth. So if you drill down, you got earth, then the waters, then Sheol. Sheol's underneath the waters. So here I see a spirit coming up out of the earth. So that's a reference to Sheol. So she's seeing a spirit come up out of the abode of the dead. Sheol, the grave. Verse 14. Then Saul asked her, "What does he look like?" And she says, "An old man is coming up." She replied, "He is wearing a robe." Then Saul knew it was Samuel, and he bowed his face to the ground and paid homage. There's some interesting details here. Now, that robe is a mantle. It's essentially a special piece of cloth that went over a robe. So, it's not just that he's wearing a robe, but he's wearing a kind of dress that's specific to prophets. Prophets in Israel wore mantles. So, it's something very peculiar and distinct to prophets. So, this is not just any spirit that's coming up. Now, one of the things here we have to keep in mind is the whole pneumatology of spirits and of the dead. One of the things that seems to be universal, this is universal to mankind's experience when seeing like ghosts and spirits of the dead, even if they're not spirits of the dead, is the mind tends to fill in clothes and dress. No one goes around and sees generally naked ghosts. For some reason, when people see ghosts or apparitions, and not all apparitions are ghosts, and not all ghosts are apparitions, but we won't get into that distinction. The mind tends to fill in clothing. Like, for example, most people who go to, say, places like haunted ghost towns, and they see a ghost, especially in the American Midwest, they tend to fill in Western-style clothing for those sightings. However, it's also interesting, too, that shoes are almost never identified, unless the person viewing the ghost happens to be obsessed with shoes. Like 9 out of 10 spirit sightings are shoeless and footless. So, but here we have, in this particular passage, Saul asks, "What does he look like?" Okay, he's an old man. Yes, Samuel died as an old man. He lived to old age, and he passed away elderly. And he's wearing a mantle, a piece of dress that is specific to prophets. And we also got to keep in mind that in the days of Israel, prophets were unusual, but they weren't rare. A lot of prophets were walking around Israel in that day. A lot of them. There was a school of prophets where people would go and learn to be prophets or learn to serve prophets. And if they became a prophet, they would take on a mantle themselves. So Saul would have known at minimum, if this had been a legitimate rising, that it would have been a prophet just from the mode of dress. So here Saul identifies the spirit as Samuel, and he bowed his face and paid homage. So we have the narrator identifying the spirit as Samuel, and now we have Saul identifying the spirit as Samuel. Verse 15, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" Samuel asked Saul. "I am in serious trouble," replied Saul. "The Philistines are fighting against me, and God has turned away from me. He doesn't answer me anymore, either through the prophets or in dreams. So I've called on you to tell me what I should do." This is Saul saying, help me, I'm in trouble, because the Lord has stopped answering me. And he's basically saying, okay, yeah, I've made my inquiries to the Lord. He doesn't respond to me through the prophets or in dreams. So you help me out. You help me out, Samuel. And again, here's the second time the narrator identifies the spirit as Samuel. But you do have to ask the question, what does Saul expect? You know, he's disobeying. He's not completing the tasks he's been assigned to. And now he's gone to a medium, and something he definitely shouldn't have done. Verse 16, Samuel answered, "Since the Lord has turned away from you and has become your enemy, why are you asking me?" And I actually love this response. Samuel said, okay, the Lord is not talking to you because he's against you. He's against you. You know, you disobeyed. You didn't do what you were told to do. You were given a sacred charge to do, and you failed to do it. You just wouldn't follow through. And so your beef is with God. Why are you asking me? What have I got to do with this? I love that. Why are you asking me? What's this to me? The Lord's against you. That's between you and God. I have nothing to do with this. Why are you getting me in the middle of this? And here, for the third time, the narrator again identifies the spirit as Samuel. Verse 17, "The Lord has done exactly what he said through me. The Lord has torn the kingship out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David." Okay? So, he just says, hey, look, you got what you're supposed to get the first time, and the Lord has torn the kingship out of your hand. I told you this. How am I supposed to help you now? And he's given it to your neighbor David. Verse 18, "You did not obey the Lord and did not carry out his burning anger against Amalek. Therefore, the Lord has done this to you today." Hey, Saul, you were told back then you didn't finish the job with the Amalekites. Everything you do is sort of a half job. So you're done. This is where your actions have taken you. You know, you decided not to obey. That was a you thing. Therefore, the Lord is just doing what he said he's going to do. Verse 19, "The Lord will also hand Israel over to the Philistines along with you. Tomorrow, you and your sons will be with me, and the Lord will hand Israel's army over to the Philistines." Samuel is saying to Saul, you're dead, but it's not just you. Your sons will be dead, and Israel will be handed over to the Philistines as well. Because of your disobedience, Saul, there will be collateral damage. Other innocent people are going to suffer because of what you did. So you're not alone in this. It's not just you that's going to be singled out here. because you were the leader, you were in charge, and because of your federative responsibility here, not just to yourself, but to your children and to Israel, they're going to suffer. It seems to be something that's woven into the fabric of our reality. There's no private sin. There's no such thing as what you do in Vegas stays in Vegas. No, it doesn't. It has repercussions that just ripple out. When you sin, others suffer. That's what makes sin so pernicious, so evil. The consequences of it, they spread. You know, when Adam sinned, it wasn't just him. This is offspring. It's all humanity that suffers, that feels the consequences of eating that fruit. And it's the same here with Saul. When he sins, it's not just him. It's his sons and Israel. When the Amorites sinned, it's not just them. It's their children. It's their offspring. It's their allies. Others suffer too. And this just seems to be a rule of our reality, that when we sin, others suffer. It's collateral damage. Innocent people suffer because of what we do. And the onus and the burden and the liability is on the sinner. And this is just something it's true for every age. And I've said this before. When somebody commits murder, it's not just him that goes to jail. Okay? Yes, he goes to jail and pays the time, but he loses his job, so his family goes without. The children that might know absolutely nothing about what the deeds of the father were are going to suffer. They're going to be castigated in their community. They're going to be ostracized. They might have to move towns. Mother's going to have to get a job and support the family all on her own. The taxpayers are going to have to pay for his incarceration. There's a huge community of people who suffer for the crimes of one person. And this is true of all sin. Sins like this. It's not just the person who does the crime and gets punished for it that suffers. It's everybody who's associated that suffers. And this is also true here of Saul. Verse 20. Immediately, Saul fell flat on the ground. He was terrified by Samuel's words and was also weak because he hadn't had any food all day and all night. This is the fourth time the narrator identifies the spirit of Samuel. So what's going on here is that Saul's been fasting. He's been hoping that this ritual act will ingratiate Samuel's return. So he's hoping that through fasting, because he's so concerned and so afraid, that he's trying anything at this point. He's trying absolutely anything at this point to get the answer he needs, to get the victory he needs. And that just isn't going to happen. Verse 21. The woman came over to Saul, and she saw that he was terrified, and said to him, "Look, your maidservant has obeyed you. I took my life in my hands and did what you told me to do." The medium here is saying, I did what you asked me, at great personal risk. Don't shoot the messenger. This is not her being compassionate. This is her protecting her skin. She's saying, I did what you asked me. I didn't want to do this. It was kind of at great risk. Yeah, it's not a great message. Please don't kill me. That's really what she's doing here. So she's not being compassionate. She's just saying, okay, you got what you need, what you wanted. Not exactly what you were hoping for. Don't shoot the messenger. And then finally in verse 22, she says, "Now listen to your servant. Let me set some food in front of you. Eat, and it'll give you strength so you can go on your way." And basically this is, have some nice soup, and there's the door. Did what you asked. Eat because you need your strength, and get out. That covers the passage. We have had the narrator identify the spirit as Samuel multiple times. We have had Saul, who is disobedient, but still identified Samuel. So I don't think there's any doubt from this passage that the spirit being called back from the dead is Samuel. So just to wrap this up, this is basically Saul going through the last throes of his disobedience and suffering the consequences, and him and his sons and Israel suffering the consequences of his sin. Saul is the leader, he is the king, and when leaders do bad things, the people suffer. So anyway, I hope you found that interesting. I hope you found that helpful. I hope you learned something. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.